Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Let's get right to the latest on the war in Ukraine this morning. Explosions, fire, and a frantic rescue effort in a residential suburb of Kyiv after Russian airstrikes hit a 15-story apartment building, trapping several people inside. Ukrainian officials say at least 2 people have died. This as Russian forces edge closer to the center of the capital and ramp up attacks on key cities like Mariupol, where city officials say more than 2,500 civilians have been killed. Still, Ukrainians say they won't give up without a fight.
We have dozens of thousands of people just in Kyiv, in Civic Guard. And if they will penetrate the city, we will make hell here for them. So they could not take Kyiv.
In neighboring countries, the refugee crisis is growing more desperate by the day. The UN now estimates nearly 3 million people have fled the violence.
Save us, children, please. Please.
Today, peace talks are set to continue after they were put on pause yesterday, and 3 European prime ministers are actually traveling to Kyiv to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in person. They're calling it a European Union mission to show support for Ukraine. In a major moment here in the U.S. tomorrow, President Zelenskyy is set to address Congress virtually as he pushes for more help from America. We have a team covering it all for you this morning. National security analyst Clint Watts is tracking Russia's movements, and Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitali has more on what to expect in President Zelenskyy's address to Congress. First, though, let's get to our Ali Arouzi on the ground in Lviv, Ukraine. So, Ali, Ukrainian and Russian officials are meeting today for more talks. Ukraine's president seems somewhat optimistic about yesterday's meeting. How did that go, and any word on what's happening today?
Hi, Joe. Well, yesterday's meeting, the Ukrainians outlined their position very clearly. Their demands were an immediate end to the war and the fighting and the complete withdrawal of all Russian troops from Ukraine. They said that there was no room for negotiation on those demands and that they were not going to accept any ultimatums from the Russians. But on a positive slither as well, they said that the Russians were listening. They were being more sympathetic to the Ukrainian demands. So there is possibly some room for negotiation there, but it's still very early days, and those negotiations haven't resumed again today. An advisor to the Ukrainian government, who I have to stress wasn't involved in those talks, also predicted that the war may be over in 2 weeks because he said the Russians are going to get bogged down and run out of resources. He said if that scenario doesn't happen, then the Russians may launch a very ferocious attack and possibly use foreign fighters. So those talks today, very key. At least what they want to come out of those is opening up more humanitarian corridors.
That is definitely a key request right now. So despite the peace talks, Russia is stepping up its attacks in and around Kyiv. This morning, there was a Russian airstrike that hit a building about 18 miles from the Kyiv city center. Now, we're learning the leaders of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovenia plan to meet with Zelenskyy later today in Kyiv. What are you learning about this visit, and just how risky is this?
That's right. Those prime ministers you just mentioned are going to visit Kyiv later. It's, as you just described, Joe, Kyiv is a dangerous place. There was a relentless bombing campaign overnight in the early hours of the morning. Buildings were hit. It's a scene of some urban sort of warfare. A lot of the attacks are coming from a district called Irpin, which is a suburb of Kyiv. So it's a very dangerous place. But they're going there to show solidarity with Ukraine, with Zelenskyy. They're saying that they're going there to show their unequivocal support from the entire European Union. They're also going to provide some aid packages for the Ukrainian people there. So it's a mission of support. But as you mentioned, it's also a very dangerous place. There is a lot of fighting there. I've heard reports this morning that the Ukrainian army are blowing up bridges there to stop the advance of the Russians, to make it more difficult for them to take Kyiv. So it's a very dangerous place. We've seen Richard's reports there. As the Vietnamese used to say, you have to destroy the village to save the village.
And quickly, Ali, while we have you, Ukraine is planning to open 9 humanitarian corridors today. What do we know about those?
That's right. They're opening 9 corridors. 4 of them are going to be in and around the Sumy region, which is in the northeast of the country. They're hoping to get people out of those very hardly battered parts of Sumy. About 4,000 people got out of that devastated city of Mariupol yesterday. I have to stress 4,000 people is only 1% of the city, but at least 4,000 people got out of there. There is a convoy of aid and humanitarians, trucks and cars trying to get in, about 60 of them. They've been trying to get in for the last 4 days. They haven't gotten in yet. They're still trying to get in today, and those are essential to get in because that humanitarian aid needs to flow in, and they've also got empty buses on that convoy to take civilians out of very hard-hit Mariupol.
Water, power, and food, all key issues there. All right, Ali Arouzi, thank you so much.
Now, for more on the situation on the ground in Ukraine, let's bring in Clint Watts. He's a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and an NBC News national security analyst. Clint, good morning. So let's, of course, start with Kyiv. Russian forces have been pummeling the city, as Ali just outlined, as well as other cities across Ukraine. Kyiv's mayor says two high-rise buildings were hit by shells. The Ukrainian military has already lasted much longer than experts believed it would. I remember in the first few days of this, us all watching Kyiv, wondering what would happen, and here we still are. So give us a sense of what the situation is in that city right now, and how much longer can they hold on to their capital?
Yeah, so Kyiv is very interesting situation that's been unfolding because the Russians just haven't advanced much. Last week, we were talking about them in Irpin. You're starting to see some dismounted infantry, some armor moving around, and I think they're just trying to establish blocking positions to the west. Separately, what we see here in the north is these axes of advance. The big change last week was armor columns coming in from the east. But again, Ukrainian military using artillery fire, using drones, very low-cost, reasonable drones, taking out these armor columns and really bringing them to a halt such that they need to resupply. Ultimately, over here to the west, you see them trying to encircle. They will try to encircle here to the south. And that was exactly what we were hearing there, that they really need to the Russians need to cut off these resupply routes. The Ukrainian military is held very well. And this is an intense urban fight. You're talking about needing maybe 6, 8, 10 to 1 in terms of Russian soldiers to Ukrainian soldiers to try and get into this guerrilla warfare in this town. It's going to be very intense. Most of the Russian military not built for this. These are armor columns that are designed for wide open terrain, large fires, use of indirect fires. That's not what this fight is going to be. They need dismounted infantry. I think that's why you're seeing calls for foreign fighters from other countries coming in, the use of mercenaries maybe over time.
And now if Kyiv does fall, Clint, to Russia, what does that mean for the rest of Ukraine? What happens then?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I think the bigger picture in terms of where Russia has found more success has been in the south, but also in the east. So let me jump first to this. In the east here, you see they've encircled several of these towns. They've hit massive resistance around Kharkiv. They're essentially leveling this with indirect fire and trying to bypass it. They want to establish a logistics corridor between these cities somewhere inside Ukraine across the Russian border. They're having a hard time doing this. Now, down south, something different is unfolding. In the south, you're seeing that they're finally starting to have some ships come in to the Sea of Azov. This is some of the first reporting on that. Last week, we saw them also using rail in this area. So they're starting to set up their resupply lines, which means that they would be able to resupply quicker to sustain their advance up here to the north. And I think that's what to look for is, do they try and move from Zaporizhia to Dnipro? And then this pitched battle that's happening here in Mykolaiv, the Ukrainian military doing very well, but how long can they hold out here in the south? And what would they do if they had lost Kyiv as well?
Yeah, Clint, I understand one of the reasons that the Russian invasion has taken, longer than anyone expected has been the surprising effectiveness of these Ukrainian drones. Now, these are slower, I understand, than a Cessna. Why have they been so effective against the Russians?
Well, it comes down to the Russians just not being able to maintain air superiority inside Ukraine. When we watched last week from the big picture around Kharkiv, the Russians lost many jets in this area. Separately, you're seeing them also lose all sorts of helicopter assets at different times, especially along this eastern area. If you don't have air superiority, you can't really take those drones down. Separately, the Russian forces in these columns, they just don't seem to have the anti-aircraft from the Russian perspective to go after these drones as well. So it's pretty remarkable to watch that very low-cost, essentially, drones are able to conduct a lot of these air raids. And I think that points to why that argument about the MiGs last week, why bring in, just a handful of MiGs when you can bring in so many of these low-cost drones that seem to be having pretty outsized effect.
All right, Clint Watts, as always, thank you.
Congress is preparing to hear directly from Zelenskyy in a virtual address Wednesday morning. Throughout the war, the Ukrainian president has been pushing the U.S. and NATO for more assistance. That includes repeated requests to impose a no-fly zone to stop deadly airstrikes. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that his speech will be a major historical moment.
It's such a privilege to have this leader of this country where these people are fighting for their democracy and our democracy. They're fighting for democracy writ large.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now with more on this. So, Ali, Zelenskyy has made speeches like this to other countries. What can we expect Congress to hear from him tomorrow when he's speaking directly to American politicians?
Look, he's made speeches like this in other countries, and he's also spoken with members of Congress before. The Senate and the House lawmakers meeting with him over the last few weeks. Of course, those have been closed-door sessions where we've been able to see the lawmakers themselves read out the meeting. This is going to be different because we will actually be able to see this address on a feed at the same time that the members who are physically in the room at the Capitol are listening to it as well. And it fits into this larger argument that's been happening here in Washington and on Capitol Hill surrounding the issues that you just talked about, the kind of support that Zelenskyy has been asking for from NATO allies, but specifically from the U.S. He's been talking about that no-fly zone. He's also been pressuring for those Polish planes, the MiGs that Clint was just talking about there. That's a conversation that's been happening widely on Capitol Hill. The other story here has really been the role that the House and the Senate have played in this. They have regularly been keeping the pressure on the administration. A lot of this stuff are things that the administration themselves have to decide. Congress, though, has been doing a good job of what they can legislatively, doing things like a Russian energy oil ban, trying to pressure for a review of World Trade Organization status before the Biden administration said that they wanted to have the most favored nation status of Russia revoked within that economic body. So Congress really has been keeping the pressure on here, and I imagine after they hear from Zelenskyy, we'll hear lawmakers continue to do that.
Yeah, and we know Congress passed that $13.6 billion aid package last week, but Republicans, even some Democrats, are calling on the Biden administration to transfer fighter jets to Ukraine. Why is there such a push for this, and what is the president saying about it?
Look, there's a lot of pressure from lawmakers to the White House, but also messaging to the international community that the U.S. wants to appear as a steadfast ally to Ukraine. They are hearing the things that the Ukrainian president is asking for. Among them are, as you mentioned, those jets from Poland that the U.S. said that they are not going to support that deal. Nevertheless, that pressure campaign is still on, and there's still conversations about what setting up a no-fly zone in Ukraine would look like as well. So these conversations have frankly been happening for weeks, but what we're likely to see tomorrow is a reinvigoration of that because of Zelenskyy speaking to this body. That is one of the things that he's been saying consistently, and I think that that's what the White House and lawmakers alike are ready to hear from him again.
And of course, Zelenskyy will be speaking to Congress, but I have to assume President Biden will also be listening. And do we know if there are any plans for those two to have another call anytime soon?
I feel like you're right there, Joe. The White House, of course, will be listening closely to what's happening on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue. Our colleagues, though, in the White House unit have reported that there is talk about sending the president overseas, potentially to Europe or to Brussels, to meet with allies to continue these conversations that he's been having about Ukraine and Russia, but doing so in person. There's no timeline set on that. It's in the early stages, but certainly a notable development as we watch the U.S. continue to take a leadership role on the world stage here, trying to keep allies on the same page, marking in lockstep in support of Ukraine and against Russia.
We'll have to keep an eye and see if that trip comes together. All right, Ali, thank you so much.
Now, the refugee crisis along Ukraine's borders with Eastern Europe is showing no signs of letting up. Nearly 3 million Ukrainians have now fled the country, and more than 1.7 million have entered Poland alone since Russia's invasion began nearly 3 weeks ago. NBC News senior national correspondent Jay Gray joins us now from the border of Poland and Ukraine. Jay, good morning. So today, what's the situation like on the ground where you are?
You know what, Savannah, we talk every day, and I was prepared to tell you that things had dipped a bit, that we weren't seeing quite as many people making the walk across the border. But I want you to take a look down the line, and you can see it is packed here. The line stretches further than we can see at this point, and it's been building throughout the morning. Moms and children coming across, many saying that they've waited quite some time to get here and now are making this move. This line has been stationary for the most part for the better part of several hours. Again, I've been here for the better part of 3 weeks. I'm overwhelmed by the amount of people we're seeing, and we've seen some large lines here. Of course, they're all waiting in line to get to the bus up here, and you can see people starting to load on the bus right now. That will just, though, simply take them to a train station, and that's one of the key issues here, Savannah. So many people not sure where they're going to end up, sure that they need to get to safety, but once they get here just across the border, it becomes very difficult, really just the beginning of their journey.
Yeah, Jay, I mean, this looks markedly different than yesterday morning. Has this developed just in the last few hours?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got here early this morning, and what we saw were waves of refugees coming through, just people coming through, families, a few families at a time, and then they started to pick up and continued to pick up. And part of the issue here is that, the buses, it's hard to get buses to come through, and so they do what they can to try and move people along. But yeah, it's amazing how much it's picked up over the last, I'd say 2.5 hours, Savannah.
Wow. Jay, we're learning about a new plan. Let's talk about getting a little bit further than Poland, from the United Kingdom, that will pay its citizens to house Ukrainian refugees. I mean, when you see a line like that, you understand how many homes just are needed to open up for these people. More than 43,000 British citizens have actually already signed up for the program. Do you think plans like these would help the situation? That line we're seeing behind you, these people find places to go in countries that are a little bit further than Eastern Europe?
There is no question, and it's something that they've been asking for Polish officials for the last week or so. We've talked about the idea that Krakow and Warsaw are running out of places for people to stay long term. They've got plenty of shelters where people can get a couple of nights sleep and kind of plan out where they're going. But this is exactly the type of program that they've been asking for, and so it's a welcome relief to those here in Poland, but it's also something they say they're going to need much more of. It's been amazing to see the outpouring of support, but again, it's just, I mean, when you see this, it's just not enough at this point, Savannah. I know that sounds simple, but that's the way it is right now.
Hey, Jay, also Mariupol, just a total humanitarian crisis there. Quickly tell us, I mean, we know they were able actually finally to evacuate civilians in a convoy of 160 cars yesterday. Have you seen any refugees there from there at this point?
Yeah, not to this point. We've been asking, but remember, it's still a tough go. It's a pretty long way away, and they've got to get through other checkpoints, Russian checkpoints. The roads in some areas are destroyed, so it may be a while before we do.
All right, Jay Gray, thank you so much. We'll continue checking in with you.
A little more breaking news coverage on the war in Ukraine, but we're also following some other major stories this morning.
Yeah, coming up, growing concerns about WNBA superstar Brittney Griner, who's been in Russian custody for several weeks, what we know about her arrest and how she's doing.
Plus, anxiety unmasked. We'll tell you about the stresses of the new normal as more COVID rules are dropped in our weekly check-in, our segment on mental health. Next on Morning News Now. Welcome back. We'll have the latest out of Ukraine coming up, including a conversation with President Zelensky's former press secretary about his speech to Congress tomorrow and the intensifying Russian attacks. But we do have other news to get to as well.
Yeah, some new news this morning. Police have made an arrest in connection with the attacks on several homeless men this month in Washington, D.C. and New York City. The suspect was taken into custody earlier this morning in Washington after being interviewed by police. He's accused of shooting 5 homeless people in D.C. and New York. 2 of them were killed. D.C. police say the description of the suspect in custody matches several of these surveillance photos you're seeing right now. They released on Monday to the public. No word yet on what charges he will face.
As the war with Ukraine rages, WNBA superstar Brittney Griner remains in Russian custody several weeks after she was arrested on drug charges.
Yeah, but there are many unanswered questions regarding the incident and her whereabouts.
For more on this, let's now bring in Ben Pickman. He's a writer and editor for Sports Illustrated. Ben, good to have you with us. So first, bring us up to speed on the incident. What was it that happened, and what do we know about where Brittney is and how she's doing?
So we know that in late January, Brittney Griner last played for this Russian club, UMMKC Ekaterinburg. And we know that in mid-February, February 17th, she was detained traveling back to Russia on what the Federal Customs Services, they saw hashish oil and have subsequently booked her on narcotics charges. That's kind of what is kind of being alleged against Brittney Griner. And in the subsequent few weeks, we've seen this video, as you're showing on screen, and a subsequent mugshot photo that has been released of Brittney Griner in kind of Russian custody. But that's about all we know publicly on the matter, and that's all that's been released on the subject as well.
And what challenges lie ahead in order to actually get her back, in order to bring Griner home safely?
I mean, I think it's a big challenge, right? And the question is if this is going to take a more legal route or a more diplomatic route, a more political route. And that's something we don't exactly know at this juncture, right? There's certainly, I think, 5 to 10 years. It depends on how much oil the Russian criminal services, criminal justice system actually finds, determines the length of a possible sentence from a legal perspective. And then, of course, as you well know, involving the backdrop with Ukraine and Russia and the war that's ongoing and how the U.S. is involved, there's this potential political situation that maybe involves a negotiation of some sort. That's something we really don't know, and that timeline also feels extended. Right now, at this juncture, there's just a lot of questions about Brittney Griner and very few answers, at least publicly, that we're getting.
Ben, Brittney Griner is certainly not the first American athlete to compete in Russia. What is it that attracts athletes to join leagues in that country?
And one of the central reasons is simply financial, right? It is simply money, that you're potentially making 3 to 4 times more playing in Russia than you are the WNBA, right? This is a team, this same club that Brittney Griner is playing for, that in 2015 actually paid Griner's star Phoenix Mercury teammate Diana Taurasi not to play for the Mercury that season, right? And just sit out so she could play for her Russian club. We're talking, magnitudes of 3 or 4 times more money playing in Russia or Ukraine or Israel, France, Spain, some of the countries that other top WNBA players play for, to go overseas and basically do that in their off seasons, what we consider the off season. But in actuality, that's really where you're making the meat of your financial money in terms of salary. Of course, there are on-court endorsements and, there's brand building, so to speak, that happens in the WNBA. But the financial incentives from a salary perspective overseas, that's a huge draw for a ton of players.
Really important conversation and something we will continue to stay on until we know more. Ben, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Now, with gas prices well above $4 a gallon across the country, we're all wondering when we'll see some relief. As NBC News Now correspondent Zincle Esamoah explains, we can expect the price of gas and some other goods to remain, quote, uncomfortably high.
The price of gas and goods is soaring, now leading to alleged gas theft. On Monday, a Texas gas station owner, Jerry Thale, says one driver allegedly stole $6,000 worth of diesel fuel using a trap door.
3 consecutive days, it was about 350 gallons of diesel.
During the 4th attempt,
I was actually in the office when he decided to show up. And as soon as I saw him drive over the tanks, I sprinted out of the office.
The driver sped off, but around the country, similar alleged gas theft incidents are taking place, with some blaming high fuel prices. Gasoline in the U.S. is up nearly 30 cents from a week ago and up nearly $1.47 since last year, with diesel fuel up over $2 since 2021. While inflation was already at 40-year highs, many experts say Russia's invasion of Ukraine means it's likely to persist.
We're likely to see another year in which 12-month inflation numbers remain very uncomfortably high.
In February, the U.S. placed aggressive sanctions on Russia.
And I'm taking robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy and that we use every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers.
But weeks later, the administration acknowledged
it's not realistic to think that we can take actions of this magnitude without feeling some consequences ourselves.
And it's not just gas.
You almost can't afford to do anything now. And I just wish it would go down.
According to experts, the cost of wheat and metal is also up. In London on Thursday, nickel prices soared so high that CEO of the London Metal Exchange suspended nickel trading.
It would have been extremely difficult for some of our market participants to continue their activity.
The price rose so much that the metal in a nickel actually became more costly than a dime. Amid the war, U.S. officials and economists say Americans should brace for ongoing inflation, while many, like gas station owner Thahil, hope U.S. leadership can pump the brakes on these rising prices soon to curb the theft and desperation.
We have bills to pay. We got employees that count us, that need that money.
Zinclair Samoa, NBC News.
Time for our weekly mental health check-in, where we walk through some of the biggest mental health headlines.
Yeah, and we also just want to take this moment to pause, take a deep breath, reflect on our emotional well-being, especially with so much going on.
Yeah, let's bring in a psychiatrist, Dr. Soumya Dave, to help us walk through some of these headlines. Dr. Dave is also the author of What a Happy Family. Always good to have you with us for this segment. Let's start with a new poll from the American Psychological Association. More Americans are feeling an unprecedented amount of stress. They're overwhelmed by money, by COVID, the images from Ukraine. What kind of impact is that having on our physical health? And then how can we try to reduce this stress?
This is having such a big impact. And when we talk about the things that you listed, the gas prices going up, groceries going up, and then the horrifying scenes in Ukraine unfolding, we're seeing one crisis after another, and we're internalizing those crises. And so what that's really doing is threatening our sense of safety. Now, in the body, that can come out in a variety of factors and really does affect every system of our body. But also mentally, we're not meant to hold on to stress and uncertainty that is this prolonged. So anybody who is overwhelmed, anybody who is struggling, please just know you're not alone, because this is a lot to carry. And it feels as though every week, every month, there's something else to add to that list. So we're just piling things on.
Oh, it's so true. Now, health experts are studying an emerging trend as a result of COVID that's being called Kyiv syndrome. More people can probably relate to this, are finding it hard to return to their lives now that COVID restrictions are dropping, even among vaccinated people. So why are people experiencing this Kyiv syndrome? And is there anything that can be done to ease back into society as these restrictions loosen?
Great question. So Kyiv syndrome, or COVID stress syndrome, refers to the fear that might come with re-entering the world once these COVID-19 restrictions have been lifted. Now, we have to remember that for 2 years, we had adapted to new habits to keep us safe, to help us live, to help us work. So many of us experienced isolation, stress, loss, grief, so many different things. And so after we've been living this way for 2 years, it's really hard to break habits anytime, but especially the ones that have been helping us survive every single day. So I recommend, if anybody's feeling any sort of discomfort at all, and of course, if they're experiencing more extreme forms of fear and anxiety, to just take it slowly. It's okay for us to set our own timelines to re-enter and to do things that we may have missed. It's okay. There's no rush, and we have the right to take our time. And of course, if things really feel overwhelming and difficult, I always recommend talking to a mental health provider or someone whom you feel like you can trust, because we do need that support as things continue to change.
All right, here's something that might help, and we just need an excuse to show some cute puppy pictures right now. Dogs, once again, proving why they're man's best friend. A new study shows as little as 10 minutes with a dog can have a positive effect on people literally experiencing pain in the emergency room. So why do dogs have this effect on us? And then how can they help us in our everyday lives, not just in the emergency room, not just with pain, but also with anxiety?
Yeah.
I think there's so much that we're still learning about the human-animal bond that's really powerful and really positive. And so people with pets tend to report an increase in motivation, in routine, and a lot of the things that can help all of us. And so when we're seeing this impact happen for people with pain, we're seeing that, hey, maybe healthcare actually has more things that we can incorporate into it to help people cope and to help people heal. And I think that, there's still research being done on this, onto why exactly this is happening. But I think there's something just so powerful about having that bond with an animal, and to just see that, hey, I'm not alone. I can find comfort here, and I can actually heal from being in the presence of this animal. So I'm just so excited to see more and more unfold on this front.
Yeah, it's so cool when we get these actual studies that say things like this. I'm like convinced Lucy's like the answer to all my, well, she has her own anxiety, but the answer to a lot of my problems. And so when you hear these studies, I'm like, okay.
With a puppy with anxiety, do you give them another puppy, or do you give, what do you do with
I don't
that?
know.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's a lot. We're thinking about that,
or
actually.
Something.
All right, Dr. Soumya Dave, always great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather?
Bill Cairns joins us. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Hey, good morning. So yesterday we talked about the chance of severe weather in Texas last night, and we did see some, and we do have some pictures to show you. Thankfully, we didn't have any reports of any really bad tornadoes or anything like that. We just had reports of this one. It looks like an isolated tornado. You can see some of that debris that was flowing there off the bottom on the ground. That looks more like a funnel. You don't see any debris at the surface. Otherwise, it was mostly hail reports, and a lot near the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There was a chance, we said, at least of 2-inch hail. There's some of that damage from that tornado we're seeing, and there's some of the hail pictures too. A lot of golf ball size hail. So typically that doesn't do too much in the way of dents on cars or vehicles. So hopefully there won't be too many people calling their insurance companies today about that. So that line of storms is now weakened. It is pushing through the southeast. We're watching it over the top of New Orleans. We have lightning right now in the area. Baton Rouge had a lot of heavy rain earlier today. Now this will move through Mississippi this morning and then Alabama this afternoon. We do not have a large area of slight risk today of severe storms. We call it a marginal risk. So very isolated cases of strong storms today. All of Florida, we should see some strong winds with those storms going through Tampa later this afternoon. And then tomorrow, we'll still see a chance of isolated strong storms from Orlando all the way through South Carolina. Again, not widespread. Here's how it will play out during the day today. Expect on and off heavy rain right through the evening commute, Montgomery to Birmingham, Pensacola, Panama City. And then about 6 to 7 p.m. is when that line of storms will roll through Tampa, heading to Orlando around 8 p.m. And then tomorrow, we watch new additional storms and rain from Raleigh to Charleston. I don't think we're going to see too much in the way of flooding, but we could see isolated cases, especially from Atlanta to Charlotte. Someone could get easily 2 inches of rain. The other spot that we're happy to report is getting rain is in Northern California. Rain has moved in overnight. It's not heavy, but we'll take every little drip we can. So the forecast for today, this is a lunch outdoors day in Washington, D.C., near 70 degrees and sunny. Not bad either. Philly, D.C., New York, Chicago, 55, St. Louis at 68. And tomorrow, things get even warmer in the middle of the country. St. Louis, 71, and Chicago near 70. So spring has sprung, and with it, unfortunately, some severe weather. But last night, well, not too much damage and no injuries. So we'll always take that.
That's good. Yeah. I like this map overall. I needed this map, so thank you.
Yes, good.
Got a nice few days. Joe, we have some walks home in our future, maybe.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. And coming up on Morning News Now, Russia accused of war crimes in its invasion of Ukraine.
But what is a war crime, and how hard is it to convict in these cases? When we return, more on the evidence, the outrage, and why the White House is holding back right now.
Welcome back. The United States and its allies are putting pressure on Russia through sanctions over the war in Ukraine. But U.S. officials fear China may have already decided to send economic aid to Russia.
Janice Mackey-Freyer joins us now from Beijing with the latest on this and more. Janice, good morning.
Good morning. Yesterday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi in Rome. They met for 7 hours. It was apparently pretty intense. And it was coming after there were multiple reports that the U.S. has reason to believe that Moscow asked Beijing for help in its war with Ukraine. Possibly drones, possibly ammunition, possibly even meals ready to eat. Now, China is denying these reports, calling it malicious disinformation, but China is widely seen as backing Russia. In London, protesters have seized a mansion belonging to Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. Banners were unfurled declaring the property had been, quote, liberated. They put that beside a Ukrainian flag. Now, when the police came, they had to use a drill to open the door and a crane to get to the balcony. Protesters insisted they weren't squatting. Deripaska had been added to a list in the UK. His assets were frozen. There is a travel ban on him and other Russian oligarchs as part of the UK's move to isolate Vladimir Putin. And finally, the geopolitics of the Russian invasion are not only limited to Earth. Up there on the International Space Station, American astronaut Mark Vande Hey is preparing to come back to Earth, getting a ride with 2 Russian cosmonauts in their Soyuz capsule. Now, it was touch and go for a while. There are some senior officials at Russia's space agency who are Putin loyalists. One of them had even posted a video showing the American flag being removed from the capsule. So there was a lot of concern that maybe Vande Hey would be abandoned there, but things have apparently worked out. The astronaut and cosmonauts will land in Kazakhstan later this month. And when he does, Mark Vande Hey will have spent 355 days in space. And that, Savannah and Joe, is a new U.S. record.
All right. Good for him, and good to hear that he's getting back
Yeah,
safe
exactly.
and sound.
Wow, what a drama. All right, Janice, thanks.
Phew.
Yeah. Now, in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson, citizens are taking to the streets to confront their Russian occupiers.
Hundreds gathered outside Kherson City Council building on Sunday, waving Ukrainian flags and chanting, and they're doing it in plain sight of Russian troops.
We want to bring in Yulia Mendel, former press secretary to President Zelenskyy and a native of Kherson. Yulia, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. So first, let's start off with that second part, a native of Kherson. You wrote this op-ed a couple days ago where you describe how these troops are essentially occupying your memories as well as your town. Just what's your reaction to the show of defiance first from your hometown?
Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm following the events that are happening in Kherson and Kherson region very closely. My family, my relatives, they all stay in Kherson. They are fully occupied. They cannot leave the city and they cannot receive any help. So Kherson is now on the verge of humanitarian crisis. Actually, if Putin wanted to return the USSR, he is managing to do this in temporary occupied territories already. It means that it's really very hard to get any kind of products. There are huge lines there. Like my father needed to wake up at 6 a.m. and to spend like 10 kilometers walking by feet just to get some butter. They eat some not very good potato already. And this is like a disaster because Russians don't allow to get Ukrainian humanitarian aid into the city. The same situation is in the villages. I was talking to my granny yesterday. Now this village where she is situated is heavily bombed because I've heard from my aunt that she hears explosions and the house of my grandparents is damaged. Right now. Also, yeah, it's very dangerous in the city, and I see that a lot of females are very afraid of eternal news about rapings in the city and everywhere. And also, to be frank, learning all this information is very difficult. Like every moment, I understand that it's dangerous to stay in the town. My mother is a pediatrician, and she always sends me the messages about how she hears shelling or how she sees a tank just near her window or how she spent several hours with newborn kids just in the bomb shelter. And despite all of this, I'm very proud of Kherson that still goes out on protesting because this is the only thing how people can show that they do not want to have Russia there. There are rumors already that Russia wants to have pseudo-referendum and to occupy the land to create another pseudo-republic that Russia has already been done in many places in post-Soviet space.
Right.
Like I'm sure, yeah. And the issue is that Russia already seized 400 protesters and put them in jail. So it's really very dangerous to protest there. I know my parents were there too, and I I really feel for them.
We want to ask you, because we know your former boss, President Zelenskyy, he's going to be speaking to Congress tomorrow. I mean, what's the message you hope he gets across to lawmakers here in the U.S.?
First of all, of course, it's a huge gratitude to all American people who are helping Ukraine. We really appreciate that the United States stand behind us. All the help in terms of military, in terms of financial, humanitarian aid is extremely important for us today. But there is another side of this situation, and is that we just do not have time anymore. We have thousands being killed. Yesterday, the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol named such extremely enormous a number of killed people. It was around 20,000 in Mariupol. And that President Zelenskyy will refer once more about the extremely need to close the sky over Ukraine. If it's not possible to make no-fly zone, then we are waiting for the aircraft so that we can close the sky by ourselves. Russia has air superiority, and it's been bombing. It's bombing our cities and towns every day. So I'm sure that he will update the American politicians, and he will ask for this help to save Ukrainian lives who are standing for the democracy now.
That's what we're hoping for, too.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Yulia, thank you for your time and
Thank you.
sharing some of your experience and your family's experience with us. We appreciate
Please stay
it.
safe. Now, the international community is outraged by Russia's assault on Ukraine and the alleged indiscriminate attacks on civilians. But the Biden administration is hesitant to officially label the attacks as war crimes. NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell takes a look at the allegations, the evidence, and what might be holding the White House back. And a warning, her report does contain some graphic images.
An air raid over Chernihiv, killing at least 47 people. Rockets striking the center of Kharkiv, and a preschool in northeastern Ukraine hit with illegal cluster bombs. Ukrainian civilians, including children, increasingly becoming the apparent target of Putin's forces. And as the world watches the death and destruction, allegations of war crimes are growing louder. With President Zelenskyy warning Russia's leaders, he said you will definitely be prosecuted for complicity in war crimes. The UN reports that at least 636 civilians have already died since Russia invaded, with the true toll sure to be even higher. Even those trying to flee finding death on the road to safety, with witnesses saying Russian forces are targeting civilians escaping through humanitarian corridors, including this deadly incident in Irpin, outside Kyiv. Under siege, civilians are trapped in Mariupol, where Russia shelled a maternity hospital, killing 3 people, including a young girl. And now this pregnant woman and her unborn child have died.
They shoot to the civil cars that are trying to escape from Mariupol. There is 350,000 people in mousetrap.
Russia has denied committing war crimes, instead claiming Ukraine is staging attacks and killing its own people, despite all evidence to the contrary. Under decades of international law, war crimes are defined as intentionally directing attacks at civilian populations, or indiscriminately attacking civilians or civilian objects like hospitals, schools, and nuclear power plants. The Biden administration supports investigating and documenting potential war crimes, with the U.S. ambassador to the UN acknowledging bluntly what the world can see.
They constitute war crimes. They are attacks on civilians that cannot be justified by any in any way whatsoever.
The International Criminal Court has opened up an investigation, responding to requests from 39 countries, including France and the UK, for crimes against humanity and acts of genocide.
What we have seen already from Vladimir Putin's regime in the use of the munitions, in my view, already fully qualifies as a war crime.
Punishing Putin will be difficult, if not impossible. The International Criminal Court and the UN Security Council can take action against war criminals, but it is up to individual countries to enforce convictions. And Russia, like the US, does not recognize the ICC's authority. Russia can also veto any UN Security Council action. And the Biden administration wants to avoid labeling Putin a war criminal now, to preserve the chance of eventually negotiating with him for an end to the war.
Thanks to Andrea Mitchell for that report. While the administration is avoiding calling Putin a war criminal, they are collecting pictures, video, and firsthand accounts of alleged war crimes. But even if they do find enough evidence, experts say it could be years before Putin would face any charges. Coming up, images of heartbreak and hope pouring in on social media from Ukraine. But how do we know what we're seeing is real? When we come back, Savannah will walk you through NBC News' process of verifying video. You're watching Morning News Now.
Welcome back. We're doing another deep dive on videos popping up on social media from the war in Ukraine. And this time, we're taking a look at the ways civilians are surviving, trying to cope with the attacks by Russia, both in Ukraine and in Russia. Let's start with this video of Ukrainian refugees. This is heartwarming. It's just kids. They're being welcomed into a school in Italy. Now, this one was verified by Matteo Maschella on our NBC News social news gathering team. This started making the rounds on March 9th. Look at this. They're all cheering for them. Matteo was able to verify this by directly contacting the family of this children. That's how we were able to make sure that this one was real. Next, we're looking at something a little bit different. This is actually a video out of Moscow. In just a moment, you're going to see a sign this woman has. This one was verified by our reporter, Bianca Britton, posted by Activatica, an online resource for activists on March 13th. You see this sign right here. It appears to show two women being detained by Russian police. One of the women, as you just saw, was holding a sign. It literally just said, it translated to 2 words. That's actually the translation. Not anything about the war, just the words 2 words. And there you see her being detained. So let's see how we verified this. We're going to first look at a freeze frame of this video. I want you to pay attention to this area and over here. I'm going to show you how our NBC News social news gathering team verified it. So you can see these green turrets on this red building, this up here, this corner in the background here. This is a major public square actually in Moscow. You can also see this building, this larger window here. We're going to swipe. This is verified, of course, just using Google Maps. You're able to geolocate that same square. And you take a look at the street view, you can see these turrets here. There's that big window I pointed out to you on this building here. That's how our team was able to make sure that this is real. Now, check out this video verified by our teammate, Ali Gustayan. You may have seen this, showing an anti-war protester interrupting a Russian news broadcast on state TV. Get this, she's actually an employee of this network. Her sign says, quote, "No to war, stop the propaganda." Now, our teammate Matthew Mulligan was able to actually debunk a Twitter account claiming to be this woman by establishing that the fake account was only created in March 2022 and was tweeting only pro-Ukraine English tweets. And as of a few days ago, I think I can show you this account, appeared to be tweeting as someone else, all the red flags of a fake account. So look at this, of course, very larger, debunked by NBC News. This is not actually that account, but you can see how quickly something like that can be taken to mean something fake. We were able, again, to verify that that video was true. That really was an employee holding up that no to war sign. This Twitter account pops up soon after claiming to be here. Not true. That's how our social media team works. Finally, back to Ukraine. These videos shared across YouTube of young violinists in Ukraine playing an old folk song while sheltering in bunkers. Some of them are literally filming between blasts. They're joined by more than 90 players from other countries to compile this whole video here, this whole mosaic you'll see in just a moment. Now, the organizers of this moment point out in their YouTube post, quote, "More Ukrainians wanted to take part, but now have guns in their hands instead of violence." Of course, these videos just serve as this living testament to what it's been like in Russia and Ukraine during this invasion, and we will keep verifying these videos and walking you through how we did that, Joe.
Good to see there's some inspiring stuff, too. All right, Savannah, thank you so much. Now, the trip for refugees fleeing Ukraine is a dangerous one, fraught with hardship. NBC News correspondent Ali Arouzi brings us the journey of one family that faced conditions far worse than they expected.
On the other side, 17-year-old Vlad and his grandmother Lubov's passage to safety turned into a desperate scramble to save her life. Their perilous, long journey took them from the battered east to the relative safety of the west, but it didn't go as planned. The strain of it all became too much. Lubov, worried for her pet cat, collapsed just after arriving in Lviv by bus.
When we went out from the bus, she became bad. So she has some problems with heart. and I went to the medical center and asked for the help.
An overwhelmed Vlad found that help for his grandmother from the Samaritan's Purse, an American charity with a health clinic helping the displaced at the train station in Lviv.
So we ran over there, literally, and started administering aid. She had a pulse when she got there. She was weak, sweaty.
No time for a stretcher. A nurse named Peter lifted her on his back and ran to the medical tent.
It's not perfect, but when you're in a crisis, you do what you have to do.
Vlad was already emotional. He had to leave his parents behind.
I am really nervous. I hope that all will be okay. And I think that I did everything what I can to help my grandmother.
He told us his grandmother's name, Lubov, means love in Ukrainian.
She wants to stay at home, but it is very dangerous to last at the Sumy because every day the attacks are are bigger and bigger. We will stay here. My grandmother don't want because she thinks that in other countries she can't live because she loves Ukraine.
The medics stabilized her.
Where's the cat?
The cat's here.
Yeah.
She was taken into a waiting ambulance, but it didn't drive off. From outside, we could see the vehicle bouncing up and down. The medics were working desperately on her. But again, her vitals dropped. This time, nothing could be done. She couldn't be saved.
I can save.
Vlad broke down. The bombs and bullets may not have killed his grandmother, but the stress of war did. What's next for you, Vlad? What are you going to do now?
I don't know. I called my mother. She will come here.
Lviv was meant to be a safe place for Vlad and his grandmother. The tragedy etched on his face. He clutched onto her few belongings and her cat, devastated at the loss. The future uncertain.
Our thanks to Ali Arouzi for bringing us that story.
Yeah. Now, beyond Russia's invasion into Ukraine, there is a dangerous and growing propaganda battle underway, and it's not just being waged overseas. Russian disinformation is now finding an enthusiastic audience here in the United States. NBC News technology correspondent Jake Ward has more.
This is South by Southwest, an annual event in Austin that celebrates the idea that the internet makes it possible to create all sorts of new art and culture and commerce because of social media. But this year, it's becoming clear that social media has made possible a conspiracy theory, one that originated here in the United States and now seems to have become the cutting edge of Russia's propaganda efforts.
There was a network consisting of at least 30 biological laboratories.
At the UN, Russia's ambassador pushed a conspiracy theory, saying at least 30 research labs in Ukraine are actually U.S.-backed bioweapons facilities, conducting what he calls dangerous experiments. U.S. officials vehemently deny the accusations.
I will say this once. Ukraine does not have a biological weapons program.
And they warn Russia could be trying to justify its invasion.
This influence campaign is completely consistent with long-standing Russian efforts to accuse the United States of sponsoring weapons. This is a classic move by the Russians.
While Russia is amplifying this conspiracy theory now, it appears to have begun on far-right social networks in the U.S. back in February, 10 days before the invasion. And now it's gone viral in America. Far-right voices online, cable news, and public figures who are rewarded with millions of views. Facebook, Twitter, and others have banned Russian state media and its coverage of this narrative.
Because they trend online, it means that mainstream media hosts or social media influencers are incentivized to essentially pick up on those narratives and amplify them because it brings more eyeballs to their content, more clicks on their platforms, and ultimately can be more dollars in their pocket.
How can we solve this problem?
Some of the solutions are going to involve holding the actors with disproportionate power in this conversation responsible.
With independent and Western journalism shut down in Russia, citizens there are being regularly misinformed. But misinformation is finding an audience here in the wide open West as well.
Now, on Monday night, Russia lost access to Instagram after the government shut it down. It shut down Facebook the week before. And here in the West, we've also deplatformed Russian state media and the narratives that it is pushing. And yet we live in a world now where a conspiracy theory that seems to have originated on American social media has been adopted as part of Russia's misinformation tactics and then moved back to the United States, being amplified all the way up and down the chain in our media ecosystem. All of this part of this increasingly fractious political moment we are in and this world of wide open social media interaction. Back to you.
All right, Jake Ward, fascinating look there. Thank you so much.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.